If you're after a 7-seater SUV that doesn't completely blow out the budget, then what are your options? Well, you could be looking at the Nissan X-Trail, or you might be checking out the Skoda Kodiaq, but you might also be worthwhile looking at this. It's the new Hyundai Santa Fe. Now, the Santa Fe has always been the largest car in Hyundai's lineup, and as we've seen recently, Hyundai's latest Tucson does really rather well in a number of different areas, but of course, it can't offer the 7 seats that the Santa Fe does. So if you like the Tucson but are finding that you need a little bit more space, then could this be the best option? Well, we're going to dive in and find out just what it has to offer. I really like the design of the Santa Fe. It feels futuristic, yet it's not too out there, but it does carve a nicely different line to other 7-seater SUVs currently on sale today. I think a big part of that is the front grille, which is really intricate, and then you've got those side lights, which are just as fancy. Around the back, it's a little bit more straightforward, but I think it's definitely an eye-catching design overall. Bearing in mind that the Santa Fe starts from just over £40,000 new, it's really impressive how much equipment you get in here. We've got heated and ventilated seats, we've got a heated steering wheel, we've got a large screen in the middle and a secondary screen ahead of you, so it certainly doesn't feel down on equipment, and realistically the fit and finish is very good. There's some nice leather materials used at the side here, and though this carbon fibre effect plastic isn't ideal, I think it's a nice alternative to gloss black because this doesn't show fingerprints up on it, so it means it looks a little bit tidier as you use it. There's a nice storage area underneath here too, and I like the second slimline bit ahead of the passenger because you can put your phone there and it's not going to slide away. So you can see that Hyundai has really thought about what it wants to do in the Santa Fe's cabin, and it's executed, in my mind at least, very well. You can tell Hyundai has really thought about the cabin of the Santa Fe. These rear seats are very comfortable, they're nice and wide with plenty of padding, and the person in the middle isn't going to feel too shortchanged either because the transmission hump isn't too big. You've got 2 charging ports in the middle, so there aren't going to be squabbles about who gets to charge up their devices. And I know for families that the integrated sun blind will be a really good touch because it helps to keep sun out of little ones who are travelling in the back here without you having to get those stick-on ones. Elsewhere, we've got some nice little cubbies at the side and some useful bins at the back of the seats too. I just think that the groundings of this car are very good and the material quality is excellent as well, but most of all it's comfortable and you've got ISOFIX points at either side so you can fit child seats should you want to. Another great feature is the fact that these seats are on rails, so of course you can tailor them to what you want. If you want to give the people in the rearmost seats a little bit extra leg room, then you can bring them forward, or if you haven't got anyone behind you, then you can bring these ones back and the people in the middle get plenty of room to stretch out. In the back of the Santa Fe, well, I'd say it's more occasional use for adults. Because the seats here are shallower than in other rival SUVs, 7-seater SUVs, you are sat higher up, so your knees are quite high in comparison to where you're sat. There's actually a decent amount of space for my feet, but my legs are quite tight in here, and because of the height of this seat, I feel quite constricted in terms of space, and I haven't even got that one put in place yet. Kids, I think it's going to be absolutely fine. Certainly, again, for that occasional use, it's not going to prove too squashed, but I wouldn't want to be sat here for too long. Having said that, you get your own independent heating and ventilation controls back here, which I think is a nice touch. And there are some smaller storage areas for loose items. Again, I think if you're not looking for a 7-seater that you're going to be using every single day, or perhaps you just often do the school run and you share it with other parents, and you have kids, more kids in the back here from time to time, then I think it's going to prove really useful. But I think if you're looking for a fully fledged SUV that has a 7-seater capability for all the time, then this might just prove a little bit on the tight side. Being a 7-seater means that you've got some flexible options for boot space in the Santa Fe. So with all of the seats in place, you've still got a reasonable amount of room here, and I'd say you could get 2 or 3 soft bags, or at least a decent amount of shopping back there. But expand that further to 571 litres by lowering these rear seats down, and that means you've got a very generous boot space, and one that will suit most families. You can take that further, of course, by lowering the middle seats, in which case the litrage goes well over 1,000, but realistically you're going to keep it in that 5-seater mode for most of the time, I think, and you'll be able to use that for all sorts of occasions. I also like the fact that the controls for the seats are manual, so it's nice and easy to use, and these rearmost seats are nice and light too, so even if you're a little bit smaller, you're not going to find it too much of a struggle to raise and lower these seats. And the same goes for the middle ones. They aren't too heavy and the mechanism is well damped. You can get the Santa Fe with a variety of different powertrains actually. There's a 2.2 litre diesel engine, which will probably be a good choice if you're doing really long distance driving. I like this version. This is the regular hybrid, which combines a 1.6 litre petrol engine with an electric motor and batteries. Now, of course, it can't travel for very long on electric power alone, and it's more for doing when you're crawling through traffic or smaller manoeuvres. But actually, it's a very pleasant setup. The only thing I would say is that the gearbox and transmission is quite loud. So when you step on it, like this, it's quite droney, but actually if you just ease off the throttle a bit and use the car a little more gently, then it's not too bad at all. One of the things that shines through with Santa Fe is this really weighty steering. It's quite different to what you might expect from a car of this type actually, but it does make the car feel quite planted and quite solid underneath you. Of course, you can set the seat wherever you like, but it does have a nice high driving position, and plenty of glass means that the visibility is good too, although the windscreen is relatively slim, so that's one thing to point out. In terms of ride quality, I'd say it does pretty well actually. Sure, some of the larger bumps do translate through to the cabin, and there is a bit of road noise generated by the tyres, but for most circumstances it does just fine. I think definitely you can hear that there's not quite as much insulation in this car as in some of its rivals, and that means that, like right now, we're getting a lot of rain noise and you can hear the water going up through the wheel arches. That's just to be expected of a car at a lower price tag. But with efficiency of around 44 mpg, the Santa Fe is pretty much on the money for what you would expect, and I reckon you could probably squeak a little bit more out of it if you tried hard. There's also a plug-in hybrid version, but that does bump up the Santa Fe's price, and it stops being quite such a good value proposition. And despite being, well, a 7-seater SUV, the Santa Fe doesn't feel overly large around you, and actually I find it very easy to park and manoeuvre. Even though that weighty steering means you have to do a little bit more work at slow speeds, it's certainly not tricky to pilot, and I think getting it around a tight multi-storey car park isn't going to prove too much of a challenge. I think Hyundai do really well to get their main point of controls sorted very nicely. We've seen it in performance versions like the i30N, but I think it's now pushing through into more mainstream cars like this because the brakes and the steering and the throttle response are all quite pleasant. I think the Santa Fe makes for a very attractive proposition, particularly if you're looking for a 7-seater that isn't going to blow out the budget. It's very spacious inside and packed with equipment. And I think even though those rearmost seats could be described as for occasional use, they do deliver the kind of versatility that you'd want from a car of this size. I also like the fact that you've got a really easy to use and lightweight system for bringing those seats up and down, which means they're going to be able to be used by all different types of people. Overall, I think this car fits the bill and will make for an ideal family car. But what do you think of this car? Would you pick it over something like a Skoda Kodiaq or something like the chunky Nissan X-Trail? Let us know in the comments section below. And while we're here, I'd like to thank you for watching this new car review on the Hyundai Santa Fe. Please leave us a like underneath if you have enjoyed this video, and since you're here, please remember to subscribe to the Motors.co.uk YouTube channel and click on the bell icon so you're notified every time we upload a new review.